Hi guys, welcome. As you're joining, feel free to make sure your cameras are off, make sure you're on mute, just so we don't get any background noise, no dogs barking, babies crying, just so we don't disturb any other of the watchers. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will come back to them at the end, and there'll be time for questions at the end. So without further ado, welcome to the workshop, Free Yourself from Anxiety. Thank you for joining. So just to give you a heads up, I've split the presentation into 6 kind of manageable chunks, so you can kind of follow through and come back to it at another time and make sense of all the content. So in case you don't know me and don't follow me on Instagram or haven't met me before, I'm Hannah. I am a certified life and wellness coach, big mental health advocate, hence why we're doing this workshop today. I used to be in a full-time corporate role and left to be self-employed and do this sort of work, which I really love. And the big reason I'm doing the workshop on this topic is because I have suffered with severe anxiety in the past. So I am in a very good position to give you kind of my experiences, things I've learned, things that worked for me and might work for you. And that's what I'm going to be going through today. So I'll get started. Section 1 is about looking backwards with purpose. So I think this is a really important one and easy to skip over, but I think it's really important to kind of track your anxiety back, know what triggers it, if there was an initial trigger, if there's any pattern to it, so that you can kind of work out kind of and expect, when to expect your anxiety to be bad and when to expect it to be better. Because if you can kind of catch it before it happens, that's gonna help you in the long run. So there's going to be quite a lot of content and questions throughout the workshop. I've got a lot to cover, so I won't be giving you any time to kind of write the answers down, but feel free to screenshot or watch the replay or write these things down so that you can come back and kind of, answer these questions, help yourself after this. So some quick questions. Can you remember the first time you felt anxious? Was there an initial trigger or event? Do you dwell on any specific past events? Is there any pattern to it? Have there been any particularly anxious periods in your life? Similarly, when is your anxiety worse? And not a question, just a point. So past experiences can prove your anxiety right before you can prove it wrong. Now, what I mean by that is, as I will cover later, your anxiety, is part of your brain that's looking for proof that it's made the right decision almost. Imagine it like a machine that wants to kind of understand how the world works. So if your anxiety pops up at different times, your brain looks to understand if that was the right thing to do almost. So it's a bit of a tricky one, but if you keep proving it right, letting your anxiety get worse, it proves to your brain that yes, it should be getting anxious at these times when actually it shouldn't. We'll come back to that in more detail. So I've got a visualization exercise. Feel free to close your eyes or keep them open. But one of the things I'm going to talk about in a little while is kind of how to change your relationship with your anxiety. And a good way to start doing that is to visualize your anxiety. So I'm going to get you to close your eyes. And I want you to think about a time when you were anxious, not hopefully, but if it's a recent one, that helps because it's kind of more fresh in the mind. I want you to be able to see yourself in that situation. And I want you to think about what your anxiety felt like in that situation. And if I now asked you the question, if your anxiety was an object or a living thing, creature, what would it be? Now, you might have an answer to that straight away. You know, you might have thought about that before, or you might not have, and it might take a little while to kind of figure out, because obviously it's not a real thing. But if you can kind of separate it from yourself and see it as something else, that can sometimes really help with the process of, you know, evolving and adapting your relationship with it. So maybe you might see it as a dark cloud. I think that's how I've described it before, or a monster on your back, anything else that you might have popped into your mind in the last few minutes. I want you to really think about what that feels like when your anxiety is bad, and what that dark cloud, that monster, does at those specific times. And now I want you to imagine what it feels like, or what it looks like when your anxiety dissipates, washes away. You know, you feel relieved. What does this thing that you've decided then do? I want you to keep that in mind throughout this. See if it helps with some of the questions and exercises, or come back to it at another time. So section 2 is be curious, which you might think is a little bit of an odd one. If you've had quite bad anxiety, you'll probably know the feeling of not wanting to know what it is at all, wanting to push it away, avoid it. So this is kind of flipping the narrative. So I'm encouraging you to be curious, understand what's going on, and kind of the easiest way to get into that is to sort of understand what anxiety is doing inside of your brain and your body, because, as I'll come to at the end of this slide, kind of the fear of the anxiety, the symptoms, can be a bit of a vicious circle, and it, you know, the fear, you're anxious, you're scared of the feelings of being anxious, comes around and makes you more anxious. So being in the know makes you feel a bit more in control. So you might know some of these things already, but I'll just run through them quickly. So the part of your brain that deals with anxiety is called the amygdala. It's a little, I think, almond-sized piece of your brain, and it is your threat detector. These might be real threats, or these might be perceived threats, and that's kind of what anxiety is. It's a perceived threat. It's in charge of the flight or fight response, which I'm sure you've heard of, and it's in charge of sending signals, hormones, around to the body, which is what creates the physical symptoms. These hormones actually also are what creates excitement, you know, physically. So the same like racing heart, kind of shaking hands, which is also an interesting comparison. So when this becomes an issue, is that it can kind of turn into a more prolonged anxiety or anxiety disorders. It's almost like a faulty switch that gets turned on when it shouldn't get turned on, and sends those signals throughout your body to get ready to fight or flight. Over time, the more your body thinks, or the more your brain thinks in that way, the pathways in your brain, you know, get more and more ingrained. Like people walking on a path, the more people that walk over it, and the more times they walk over it, the deeper it becomes, and the more, you know, that becomes the automatic route that people take, and that becomes the automatic route that your thought patterns take. With anxiety, your thoughts and memories can become triggers and not just external situations. And that's another bit of a tricky one, but they're your thoughts and your memories, so you do have control over them more so than an external situation. So that's kind of a positive thing to bear in mind. And a final point on this is that treating the symptoms of anxiety is very different to treating the anxiety itself. You can treat, maybe you take, I know I've taken all sorts of things, peppermint oil, like lozenges, like things that, you know, herbs and remedies and things, which is all well and good, because sometimes you do just need to keep on top of it and manage the symptoms. But this is kind of what this workshop is going to cover. The more internal stuff, the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and how to kind of unpick everything. So if you have anxiety or have in the past, you'll probably recognize some of these symptoms. Something else I really recommend, which we don't have time to do now, because as you see, there's quite a lot on here, is to kind of understand the reason behind each one of these, or whichever ones you get yourself. Because once you kind of understand why the body or brain is doing something, it feels, again, easier to take back control of it and just understand it and be less afraid of it. So, for example, on the physical side, increased heart rate. This is part of the brain. You know, the amygdala sent the signal to increase heart rate, to increase blood flow, ready to fight or run away, basically. And as a result, this causes hyperventilation because you're breathing faster, which causes dizziness, and so on and so forth. So it's all kind of connected. And, you know, you can kind of, if you're anxious and feeling any of those symptoms, you can be like, oh, yes, I feel dizzy because I'm breathing too quickly, because my heart rate's increased, because my brain has told my body that it should be doing that. So that can kind of, as another way to kind of take a breath, kind of take a moment of calm, remember, you know, realize, understand what's going on in your body. It's not something to be afraid of. You are in control of it, and so on and so forth. So, a nice diagram on this slide. So something else I wanted to mention in this section is the idea of your anxiety as a line on a graph. So the baseline is kind of neutral, and anything up here is anxious, and anything down here is happy, calm, absolutely fine. So yours might look like one of these, or it might look different. So on the left, we've got very spiky, lots of panic spikes, anxiety only reducing after it's peaked. And this is definitely what I thought about my anxiety. I thought it had to go up and up and up and up. There was no way to get rid of it except having a panic attack and kind of releasing all of those stress kind of feelings, releasing the tension, releasing all the energy that's kind of pent up. And the middle version here is a little bit more up and down, but still not very smooth. And the example on the right-hand side is much gentler, imagining it as kind of a wave, much curvier, much more fluid, much softer. And imagine this is your anxiety, knowing that it will go up, but it will go down again, and it might go up a little bit, but it's okay because it's going to go down again. Kind of that reassurance in yourself, that it doesn't have to reach panic stage, and you know, you can kind of live with it and move with it. So now we'll move on to this section called challenging beliefs. Now, in my work as a coach, I do a lot of this sort of stuff, and I think it's really integral to kind of the anxiety challenge of you know, bringing it back to yourself, bringing yourself back in control. So if you haven't done any beliefs work before, which you may not have, beliefs are things that we believe to be true about ourselves, others, and the world we live in. Beliefs can be conscious or unconscious, but they act as filters that guide our perceptions and expectations. They often stem from childhood or significant life events and are consolidated over time. That's another example of the brain wanting to find proof points of something. So you can see it's all tied in together. Some examples of beliefs here, just to get your brain in the right kind of understanding of what beliefs are. These are all negative beliefs, I should mention. So I'm a boring person. I must never make a mistake. If people don't like me, I'm worthless. I am a failure. There's something wrong with me. It's wrong to express my opinion. I can never win. I must earn happiness. And if I'm not good at anything, I'm good at nothing. Some of these might resonate with you, they might not. Just some examples for you to bear in mind. So now moving on to identifying beliefs, because you might not know, because they can be very subconscious, very kind of locked down inside of you. So I've put together this formula, a flow chart of kind of the process to identifying a belief. So we're starting with situation on the left, to initial thoughts, what it means about me, and what does that say about me, and what does that say about me again. So I've done an example because it can be a bit confusing. So the situation, you're stressed at work, fine. The initial thoughts you get after you realize you're stressed is that I can never just relax and get stuff done. Ask yourself what that means about you. I'm rubbish because I can't keep on top of everything. And what does that say about you? If I'm not good at everything, I'm good at nothing. And what does that say about you? I am a failure. And this is the core belief. So this is a process you can go through yourself. It might be useful to kind of bear it in mind for a time you're having, you know, when you're stressed at work or when a difficult situation comes up in your life, so that you can really tap into those feelings and emotions that you're feeling kind of at the present moment. So once you've got your core beliefs, there might be one, there might be several, we're going to work on challenging those beliefs. Again, another lovely flow chart for you. This time, it's a little different. So we start with the belief that we found in the last stage. So the belief is I am a failure. We then write down evidence that it's true, the proof points. So I've put an example here. I had to work late because what I'd done wasn't good enough. I recommend doing as many examples as you can, kind of like a pro-con list. So once you've done those, then you move on to evidence that it's false, evidence that you're proving that belief is wrong. So, for example, my manager said they were really pleased with that project. If you look at it positively, how is it different? Those things weren't really big failures. It was more of a personal feeling. I think this stage is really important because when we're anxious, we're obviously often in a very negative mindset. So it's good to kind of put your positive hat on just for a minute. You know, and if you were advising a friend, for example, what would you say about it? And then finally, we develop an alternative belief, something a little bit more positive, a little bit more, yeah, just something you can work towards. And, you know, not, you know, saying I'm a failure is quite a horrible thing to say about yourself. So something a bit kinder. So, for example, at times I will fail, but I will also succeed at a lot of things too. We kind of want to unpick things we believe about ourselves, usually very negative things, which kind of feed into the anxiety and kind of all those, you know, thoughts that are like trickling away in the background when you're anxious that only make it worse. So that's the end of that section. As I said, I'm moving quite quickly, so you'll be able to come back and work on this in your own time. So this section is called acceptance and understanding. Now, I bang on about this quite a lot on my social media. So if you're on there with me, you've probably heard me talk about it before. But acceptance, I think, was one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle for me. And at the time when I was working with a therapist and they told me I have to accept the anxiety to kind of move away from it, I was like, that makes no sense to me. But after going through the process, it does work, which is quite amazing. So this is about working with your anxiety instead of against it. Anxiety thrives on the distress that you feel about your anxiety, coming back to that vicious circle idea. So you're only making it worse. The more you push it away, the more you avoid it, it's only kind of feeding more into that vicious cycle. So we're talking about understanding, working on getting to know your anxiety to feel like you can beat it. And we're talking about connection. You always feel negative about anxiety until we change our relationship to it. See, I said we'd come back to this point on relationship. So I've got another lovely diagram for you here. And I just want to talk about coping mechanisms, because those are the things we do to help ourselves when we're in times of, you know, stress or anxiety or just difficult times. This is kind of what the human brain tends to do. So on the left, we've got proactive coping, you know, you're just coping the little things come up, but it's fine, you can manage. And then kind of a bigger stressor happens. This might be, you might not know what triggers it, but you suddenly get a burst of anxiety. Maybe it's you suddenly have a big meeting at work that you weren't expecting, and it just piques your anxiety. The next stage would be acknowledging that distress, which we would all do. I'm feeling X, Y, Z. And then we evaluate our ability to cope with the situation. Then there's two possible paths. We have at the top problem-focused coping, which we use when we feel in control, and emotion-focused coping used when we feel we can't manage the situation. And another way to describe those two is a healthy coping mechanism and avoidance behavior. Now, my anxiety was made up of a lot of avoidance behaviors, which I didn't necessarily know that that's what they were. I thought they were healthy, like coping mechanisms. But when I unpicked them, I realized that's not really good for me. That's not really good for me. That's not really good for me. Which is why I wanted to talk about it today. So a question to ask yourself when you're feeling anxious next time is when you find yourself thinking, I can't do something because it will make my anxiety worse. I want you to ask yourself, is it a healthy coping mechanism or is it an unhealthy avoidance behavior? So I've got some examples for you because that can be a bit confusing. So on the left, we've got the healthy side, and on the right, we've got the unhealthy side. And you can kind of see where they overlap and where you might be able to persuade yourself that this is the right thing to do, even though it's not. So, for example, eating comfort food versus overeating and feeling guilt, remorse. Spending time with friends versus partying all the time to avoid your feelings. Getting to work early versus overworking and exhausting yourself. Watching your favorite show on Netflix versus needing to watch TV to fall asleep. Having alone time versus isolating yourself. Something to think about. I'll just go back to that quickly just to finish off. Again, this is a bit of a tricky one because often you've spent months, years persuading yourself that whatever you've been doing, you need to do. Otherwise, your anxiety will kind of overwhelm you, be completely out of control, which, yes, might be true in the moment. I think this isn't where you want to start working on your anxiety, which is why I've kind of put them in an order, because you need to start working on the other stuff first. To get your anxiety, you don't want to be in crisis mode when you're working on this kind of thing. Sometimes you do just need to use your coping mechanisms, which have proven to kind of help your anxiety like wash away for a minute. So this is something to come back to when you feel a little bit more in control. So yeah, I think something to put in your back pocket and come back to when you feel like it's a good time. So second to last section is self-care for anxiety. Another thing I talk about all the time, and I'm going to talk about it here as well. I think self-care has been so important in my journey, whatever you want to call it, because it's something proactive that you can do that is doing you good, and you can enjoy it as well. So I've given loads of ideas here. I won't talk through them all because there's quite a few, but feel free to screenshot and keep them for ideas in the future. So I've split them into categories. We've got physical, emotional, social, spiritual, workplace, and financial. There's probably more categories. I think this is a good kind of starting point. Different people will need different amounts of each. Some, perhaps you're not a very spiritual person, so you just need a little bit of that, time in nature and time alone feels like you cover that base. And some people will need more of others. So just things to bear in mind, making sure you kind of got all bases covered, and just a way to know you're doing something good for yourself and good for your brain. because your anxiety will really thank you for that. So yes, this is a good point, and quite a one based on personal experience for me. You can see anxiety as a kindness, a nice thing you do for yourself, or you can see it as a chore. I guess that kind of, you could say that about anything, but when you see it as a chore, as a negative, it's not really self-care. It's just another thing you have to do. So if you're in that frame of mind and doing self-care, it's not doing you any good. So bear that in mind. So I've kind of put some examples here of positive and negative perceptions. So the first one there, I'm doing this as a treat for myself versus, I need to do my meditation. And lots of similar ones there, which you can read through. Again, there's no point in doing self-care or doing, you know, things for yourself if you're in a negative frame of mind, if you are frustrated, if you don't want to do it, you know, all of those kind of feelings. Kind of, I would recommend trying to flip that. Maybe you recognize the negative voice in your head chatting away. Kind of, how can you switch that up into something more positive to get yourself hyped or to get yourself relaxed? I think that's a really big one when it comes to self-care for anxiety. Otherwise, you're just feeding the anxiety because you're just adding more things to your plate. So yes, that's a good point. And finally, on this section, if you've read Atomic Habits, which has been quite popular in recent years, the author talks about habit stacking, which I really like because it's a really easy concept and feels like quite a good life hack. So the formula he uses is before or after my current habit, I will do my new habit. So for example, the idea here is you want to bring more self-care into your daily routine. When you just have that idea and kind of sometimes, you know, how you go at something at full force, but you haven't really kind of got into it, you know, you'll do it for a couple days, a week maybe, and then you'll be like, oh, I don't have time to do this, and you'll go back to kind of your old ways. So what I recommend here is to pick one act of self-care that's important to you or something new you want to try. You want to choose a trigger, which is a current habit you do every day without fail. So brush your teeth, have a shower, get ready for bed in the evening, get in from work, something you're going to do without thinking. The new habit needs to be quite specific and actionable. If it's quite vague, your brain will try and find ways of getting out of it because your brain likes to make things easy for itself. So being quite specific with the new habit will be really helpful. So for example, I want to do 10 minutes of meditation every day, and I'm going to do it after I brush my teeth. That's now kind of connected to that. So as you're brushing your teeth, you'll remember, oh yes, I want to do that. And you'll go straight to wherever you meditate and do your 10 minutes. So yeah, it makes it easy to remember daily, and you can stack multiple things on top of each other. So you might have time in the morning to do some meditation, some stretches, you know, get your dinner ready for when you come in from work, stuff like that. It's a really good, yes, life hack, like I said. So one to bear in mind. And now the final section, which is the one that you're probably most interested in, is going forward with confidence. Now, anxiety usually takes away a lot of someone's confidence. So it is a process. And this is some more positive things that you can do for yourself today, tomorrow, you know, stuff that you've got in your back pocket. So celebrating your wins. There's some examples from a previous time of mine so that you can see the kind of things I'm talking about, stuff that people without anxiety will do without a blink of an eye. So these are both celebrating your wins and giving yourself something to work towards. So I would recommend writing down a list of things you can't or won't do because of your anxiety. They can be really small things, it could be really big things, whatever comes to mind. Turn them into a list of milestones that you can tick off to see how far you've come. This is a perfect opportunity to work on these avoidance behaviors that we kind of discussed earlier. Perhaps you are partying all the time, take that example. You're going out all the time drinking because you don't want to spend time alone. So you might put on this list, I said no to a night out because I was tired and I just wanted to spend time alone, even if that meant being alone with my anxiety, stuff like that. If a goal feels unachievable right now, I'd recommend breaking it down to smaller steps, because something might trigger a panic attack. I'm not asking you to go around trying to give yourself a panic attack. So yeah, do what feels right, do what feels comfortable, but kind of chip away at your anxiety and prove to yourself that I can do these things. I can do that now. I can go to the cinema without panicking about it beforehand. I can make last minute plans. So it's a really nice thing to look back on, because when you're in the day-to-day, you don't remember everything. I don't remember how I felt last week. I don't remember how I felt a year ago. So it's a really nice kind of record of how far you've come. And the other side of that is kind of being able to support yourself. Whilst having a support system like good friends and family you can talk to about how you feel, that's amazing. But you also need kind of something in the back of your head, or in the notes section of your phone, or in your journal, whatever, for those times when you are on your own, maybe middle of the night if you were anything like me, when you're on your own and you need to kind of get yourself out of an anxious spiral. So I'd say write down some supportive notes that you can read back to yourself, whilst doing deep breaths and all of the good things. I would also say, know what works for you when it comes to improving your anxiety. Everyone's different. You might need to take a walk, you might need to be on your own, you might need to be with someone and talk about it. Know what works for you and don't be afraid to ask for it. And finally, on this point, is to prioritize yourself and know that it's okay to say no. Again, this is quite a fine balance, because like I mentioned earlier, it's very easy to turn spending time alone into isolating yourself and feeling like you can't go out and can't do anything. So yeah, it's a fine balance. So make sure you're doing a bit of both. But if you really just don't feel up to something, or you just need to postpone or cancel, that's okay. Everyone needs to do that from time to time, whether they have anxiety or not. So yeah, that's just one to keep in mind. So a final word from me is here. I want you to know that it really is possible to free yourself from anxiety. I genuinely never believed I would ever feel normal again. And I know normal is kind of very different for everybody, but I'd spent so long being anxious from the crack of dawn till, just I was never free from it. So if you're here watching this and you're feeling like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, I am that person here to tell you that it can and it will get better. So don't give up, and keep kind of chipping away at it, keep working on it, do all the good things for yourself that are good, go to therapy, speak to someone, a counselor, coach. Just don't give up. So on that note, I don't want to be Debbie Down or anything, but you might want to screenshot this for yourself or someone that if they ever hit crisis point. This is only, I looked at so many different helplines and, emails and numbers you can call and text. There's so many options out there, but do make sure if you need to, you can use these services. That's what they're here for. And don't ever feel like you're doing this alone. So that's that. Hopefully, what time are we on? Okay, I've run through that quite quickly. Thank you for joining, everyone. I know I kind of spoke at the speed of light and went through so much stuff. So there's a lot for you to probably go back and work on. So yes, I will stop sharing now and check if there are any questions in the chat, which I don't think there are. Nope. Feel free to pop a question in there. And if not, you can always reach out to me afterwards. Yes. Thanks everyone for coming. I really appreciate you being here, and hopefully some of the stuff I've said today has resonated or is something you can refer back to at another time. That's it. So I will let you all pop off now. That's not the right word. You can all leave now. Thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure to speak to you today. And thank you to the Happiness Planner for letting me host this workshop. Hopefully more to come in the near future. Okay, bye guys.